And at this point, I'd like to thank LabTwin, who helped develop the content for this presentation. LabTwin is creating the next generation of digital lab tools for smart labs, starting with the world's first voice-activated lab assistant. With LabTwin, scientists can collect data, access information, manage experiments, and streamline documentation simply by talking. Using voice recognition and machine learning technology, LabTwin's smart assistant simplifies data capture, structures valuable information, and provides suggestions to scientists in real time so they can make more informed, data-driven decisions. With a mission to empower scientists, LabTwin is backed by BCG Digital Ventures and Sartorius. Its voice-powered assistant is used by hundreds of scientists in leading biopharma companies and academic institutions around the world, including Deutsches Primatenzentrum, University Medical Center Göttingen, and the University of California, San Francisco. All right, well, now I'd like to introduce you to your speakers for today's webinar. Magdalena Paluch is a user experience designer and entrepreneur with over 13 years of experience in building new technologies. In her previous role as director at Boston Consulting Group Digital Ventures, Magdalena led corporate-backed startups and innovation initiatives in Europe and the US. She was also an innovation strategist at Toyota, where she identified and implemented emerging technologies in mobility and robotics. Magdalena brings her user-centric design approach, strategic thinking, and business insights to LabTwin, where she leads a multidisciplinary team of experts. All right, a second speaker here, Mathias Friendo, is a group leader at Fraunhofer IPA in Stuttgart, specialized in lab digitization. Together with his team, he supports industrial partners in the digitization of their laboratory processes. And previously, Mathias worked as a development engineer for Bertrand after having completed a Master's of Science in Informatics at Karlsruher Institute for Technology. All right, and finally, your last speaker of the day, Bruce Dembowski, holds a Master of Science degree in chemistry from the University of Connecticut. Bruce started his career at Cephalon Incorporated in 1992, and in 95 moved to AstraZeneca, where he held a variety of discovery R&D roles. Now, since joining Avantor in 2010, Bruce has held positions in the Laboratory Services Division. He's currently Director of Scientific Services with responsibility for science, innovation, and partnerships. And he's recognized in Avantor globally as an innovation leader and is passionate about creating world-class customer experiences for Avantor's science-focused customers. All right, well, today's webinar is going to be a more detailed discussion of what we touched on in LabTwin's first webinar with XTalks in December of 2019. That was titled Top Laboratory Informatics Trends in 2020 and Beyond. And that featured a roundtable discussion featuring Alok Tai of Ignite, Oscar Cox, who was or is CEO of iVention, Guru Singh from LabTwin, and Thomas Hensler from Microsoft. That was a great discussion, and I encourage you to check that recording out, of course, on xtalks.com, and I'll pass you a link to that here in your chat box right now, so you can store that away for later if you wanted to have a look at that. So I'm going to send that link to you all right now. So make sure to copy that and paste that for future reference later. But I'm really excited for today's roundtable discussion. So let's first jump in to have a look at the agenda here before we begin. We'll start off today with a quick intro to digital voice assistants, looking at the landscape of what is offered now to the general consumer. We'll then dive into use cases of how R&D labs are beginning to use voice assistants in the workplace. So we might touch on things like method development or their use during microscopy, for instance. Next up, we'll focus on what types of technological integrations are possible. So honing in on how voice assistants might interact with the technologies you currently have in your lab. After that, we'll start discussing the challenges that you might expect when adopting this new type of tech in your lab. And finally, we'll finish off with a roundtable discussion of what we can expect from the future once we've adopted these types of digital voice assistant technologies in the Pharma R&D workspace. So looking forward to all of that. Let's now dive right in to our first topic of the day and get some context here. So we're likely familiar with the digital voice assistants in the general consumer space, I think, with voice assistants like Siri and Alexa. We're also familiar with certain ways that we might use those voice assistants, for instance, maybe to get directions to a certain location. So a question here to Magdalena. How have you seen the development of digital voice assistants change over time? And can you give us some background here?
Sure. The adoption of voice assistants, as we have witnessed over the recent years, has been one of the fastest growing trends, I think, in consumer technology, whether through standalone devices or existing mobile devices. One particular consequence of this device explosion, as I would say, is that simpler interactions become completely outsourced to voice assistant devices, reducing screen time on smartphones, enabling us to multitask. There are also indications that smart speaker voice assistants are becoming integrated into daily routines of people in a way that voice assistants on other platforms maybe are not just yet. This means that voice-only interactions will become increasingly expected in the future. Despite this, what we've seen recently is smart displays. Smart displays are voice assistant device category that has emerged strongly within, I would say, past 18 months, alongside tablets and tablet docks designed to offer contextual smart display functionality. Both of these developments hint that voice assistants are now looking to provide multimodal support to users, not only via voice, but also via other modes. Smartphones, I believe, will continue to have the lion's shares of the installed base because the ubiquity and the flexibility and the ease of use of mobile devices. It is much easier to preload an assistant onto a phone rather than make a specific purchase of an assistant device, and that will continue. Another already, I would say, mature category within voice assistant and digital assistant, a truly multimodal category is in-car assistants. There, I think this category has already become very much a multimodal. I think we also have seen adoption of voice assistants within a B2B context and enterprise context. And there, I think the biggest applications are right now in organizational space, anything that has to do with intelligently sorting and booking meetings, appointments, etc.
Right. So obviously, lots of opportunities there for business in general. Just touching on what you said there, yes, absolutely. Lots of. I was one of the early adopters of this kind of things just in my home. Some initial resistance from my colleagues at first, but more and more of us are definitely starting to use this and get comfortable with this. So Magdalena, why do you see that there's a need for this type of tech in an R&D space?
It's a good question. I mentioned in-car assistants as a mature category at this point. And when we think of labs, I see many parallels here. Even though it seems like very distinct and different categories, I think there's a lot of similarities. Having been involved in my past in developing HMI, human machine interface systems, and autonomous drives for vehicles, I know this space very well, and I understand what it means to actually design for adoption of such technologies. And I still actually remember, thinking to personal experiences, I still remember being in grad school and printing directions to go somewhere. Then came Google Maps, then came standard in-car navigation. I think similar parallel takes place now in the lab, only unfortunately 15 years later. Scientists also need a virtual navigator in a sense. They prepare their protocols, they print them out, they take them to the lab, they use them to run the experiments, they note changes on them, and then they have to transcribe the notes into digital repositories, only then to not be able to access them directly when they are back at the bench again. And when you think about a driver, he or she has to have hands on the wheel, eyes on the road. Many things can happen. So he or she needs multimodal a way of accessing information. That's why the voice is becoming such a mature category in cars. And now think of a scientist in a lab. She's working under the hood or under a microscope. Hands need to stay busy with material or instruments. Many things can happen, and even worse, as she needs to work in a very sterile environment. So I often think of LabTwin and what we do in some respect as a type of scientific navigation system for the scientists in a lab. I think this space is definitely ripe for this type of disruption.
Right, yeah, if you put it like that, definitely I can see that. I am so happy the days of printing out MapQuest maps are done for me. I can definitely see that analogy there. That's great. All right, thank you very much for that, Magdalena. I think that gives us some great context to move forward into some use cases of voice assistance for R&D labs. Obviously, there's some real potential here to revolutionize, I think, the workflow of a researcher with voice assistant technology. So yeah, let's get some detail on how maybe this technology could be being adopted in different R&D scenarios. So Bruce, you've worked in the pharma R&D and laboratory services space for some time now, and you're currently responsible for, as I said, science, innovation, and partnerships as a director of scientific technical services. So how have you seen voice assistants being used in the lab, and what type of impacts are you seeing as a result?
Yeah, what we're seeing, you know, our work that we do at Avantor means that, you know, every day our teams are working with researchers, you know, in the pharma industry, in biotech, in high-tech production areas. So, you know, we cover many different types of laboratories, and we definitely see, you know, the sorts of challenges that Magdalena mentioned, right? Scientists are really trying to be more efficient and effective in how they execute their work, right? So that's a big driver for exploration into use cases for the voice assistants, right? But we're also seeing, you know, a heavy focus too, particularly in our production areas with quality, right? Managing deviations or defects, and indeed trying to avoid those, and having good, solid data when the scientists need to go back if there was a bad batch or a lot produced, to be able to do that root cause analysis that really relies on having good, detailed information on exactly what was done, what was used in that particular experiment. So you see on the slide, there's a couple of examples, right, where we definitely see use cases. And I think, you know, folks on the line will recognize there's plenty of times in the laboratory where, as Magdalena says, you don't want to be taking your eyes off the road. But indeed, you know, we do ask our scientists very often to go to the electronic lab notebook, to go to the LIMS system, to print out an SOP and maybe try to tape it to a fume hood sash so that you have those work instructions right in front of you as you're executing things. But we're seeing now, just as you said, the follow on to people really beginning to adopt this technology in their daily lives, in their cars and in their homes, saying, hey, this is a perfect fit for the lab as well. We're certainly seeing that core use case of, using voice, right, to guide a scientist user through the steps of a procedure. We're seeing, again, within that, even further use case of, prompting those scientists to taking the proper safety precautions, reminding them to use the proper personal protective gear as they're working in a specific lab, the recording of the contemporaneous notes. And if we think back to when I started in the lab, right, paper notebooks was still a thing back then. It was easy to pick up your paper notebook as you moved from lab workstation to workstation, or even between labs. Now we've moved to, centralized databases for our laboratory notes and results, which is a great thing because it allows for reuse, right, of those procedures, but it's certainly not as convenient as it was once upon a time when you could just pick up your paper notebook and take it with you wherever you wanted to go and keep your notes as you went. So I think voice plays a very important role there because it's portable, it's low cost solution, right? It's just there, it's always on, and it really, to me, in many ways, becomes the paper notebook of the future. But we're also seeing, control of instruments. We see scientists dabbling with using voice to start and stop robotics and automation. That's a great use case. And I think more and more we're seeing scientists looking to how can they use the voice tools, right, as sort of that central point of access to different databases, both to look up information, but also to get feedback now that we're seeing more use of artificial intelligence, right, in a broad sense, to be able to get guidance back, right? You're having a result, getting guidance back on what you should be doing next if it's a deviation. So I think the impacts, as you asked about, right, it's about speed and quality. The use of these kind of technologies is really sort of the next step from the ELN, the LIMS, the quality management database systems, now making that technology always on and always at the fingertips of the user. And I think that's where voice is going to play a very, very important, very important role to play going forward, is making those technologies now really that always on, always at your fingertips, and making them even more and more interactive as AI and machine learning gets better and better. And then certainly the reduction of errors, and we shouldn't overlook the safety components, how these types of tools are being used, right, to remind scientists to follow proper sterile procedures, to use the proper PPE, and follow the workplace rules that keep them safe. So those are the few of the things that I'm seeing right now.
Right, just a few there. Yeah, that's awesome. Obviously, lots of different use cases you're seeing. I'm wondering from Mathias, you've been supporting organizations when digitizing their laboratory processes. Can you give us a bit of background of what that actually entails and any special use cases you've come across for using digital voice assistants in your work?
Yeah, hello. Maybe I start with a little example how we proceed and how we start with technology. So we start with a really easy thing. We had a storage. I think everyone has a storage in a lab, and where we store our consumables, chemicals, and sample. And we asked us, okay, how we could help other people, because it's really time-consuming, searching for things, not finding them. You don't know where they are, and so on and so on. So we think, okay, what was the first step? What we did was we developed a little application, a little web application, use the database, put all the things where they were, the shells, etc., into it, and had a really easy search functionality. So our people can also search for things where they are, and it works really good. But after some time, we realized that it's really not so handy, because the people has to take their tablet. They have to type in what they want, what they are searching for. After that, they get the information where they find the plate, for example, have to move there. And okay, it's okay, it works, but we realize that it's not the perfect user interface for such an environment. So our next step was to use this database. We took a Google Home speaker, and then we combined the both systems, our database with the speaker, and now we have a new functionality. You can ask the system where you find what and where, and this was much more faster, more precise. The people love the thing, but we realized something new, because now the people ask more and more things to the system. And for example, if you ask the system, where can I find the microtiter place, you get in our storage, you get 20 examples. So we thought of, okay, how could we solve this problem? And in this case, we said, okay, we combined both technologies. On the one hand, you have a tablet, you have a display where you can show the results of your speech request. And on the other hand, you have this really fast system with asking the system where you find the things. And so the combination of hands-free with voice recognition, it's more faster and it's more natural for the people. So the combination of technologies is normally the way we took for our custom projects.
Right. Okay, that's super interesting. Thanks for that, Magdalena. We've covered a number of use cases here on this slide. Do you have anything that you'd like to point out in terms of use cases that stand out as being particularly impactful?
Yeah, I think all of those that Bruce and Matthias mentioned are core, and what you see on the slide actually is majority of those use cases are very specific and more frequent in R&D. And I think there's a lot of great use cases there for cell culture, for microscopy, for biomarkers testing. When you move to, I think Bruce touched upon this manufacturing and QC, this is also when this becomes extremely a must-have, because at these points, before you're bringing a new product such as vaccine onto the market, and when you're running quality control tests, you need to ensure their safety. This is a part of a highly regulated protocol, and the standard procedure has to be followed. This usually consists of filling out form at each test. So we have witnessed scientists really stopping the experiment every 5 minutes or so, taking their gloves off just to complete that specific step in the protocol they have completed, and they see certain results, confirmation, and then they deglove and they put the gloves back on just to resume the work. So this is quite time consuming. So when I think Bruce was speaking about speed, I think in R&D the benefits of these use cases are, yes, time saving, but majority of the use cases, it's like you just collect much more data and it can be in one place, versus in QC, there you have a drastic sort of improvement on a time savings, because you don't interrupt the workflow, you just can proceed with your protocol as intended. So I think that's a great use case.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, it's been a number of years since I've worked in the lab, but definitely remember all those times removing the glove, deciding whether or not to get a new glove on, maybe blowing up the old glove so I can get my hand in there. Obviously a huge time-consuming process if you're looking to get things done quickly. Thanks for that. I think we'll move on now, but before we do have our first polling question of the day, and that's launching on your screens right now. You can vote on this in the audience in real time by clicking on your screen there. So the question we have for you, which R&D scenario is most suitable for voice technology, do you think? Is that microscopy, in vivo surgery, cell culture, or flow cytometry? Again, you can vote on this in real time by clicking on your screen. You can get your votes, and now I'm seeing a lot of you doing that at the moment. Which R&D scenario is most suitable, do you think, for voice technology? All right, this is the first of 3 polling questions of the day, and I'm going to close polling. You can get your last clicks in, and let's take a look at what you, the audience, has to say about this. Most of you saying in vivo surgery makes a ton of sense there. 50% of you said that, 33% saying microscopy, 8% saying cell culture, and another 8% saying flow cytometry. Interesting. Thanks everyone for voting on that polling question. Let's move on now to another topic on the different ways that digital voice assistants are being used in an R&D setting. From that to the different types of technological integrations we're seeing in this setting. So we're obviously seeing lots of types of different applications here. Bruce, I'll start with you again here. I know that you've had some experience with inventory management solutions. How can you see voice assistants integrating within those types of platforms?
It's a good question. You know, at Avantor, one of our business units is the VWR lab supplies distribution business, and we work with a lot of our customers, right, to make it easy for the scientists to get to both source the materials that they need to run their experiments, but also find them within their laboratories. And as we say, inventory management of reagents and the lab consumables that we all use every day in the lab. And that can be a significant time sink for those scientists, as Mathias mentioned as well. You know, we certainly, as scientists, try to be organized. We try to create workstations that have all the things that we need at those workstations, right? But there's always those few items, particularly reagents and chemicals, that are stored in specific locations. And as you're working, being able to locate those things without having to really stop what you're doing is a great opportunity for the integration of the voice assistant. Can also be, we think, connected to some of the protocols, right? When a protocol comes up on the voice assistant saying, you know, charge this much material into a 50 cc conical tube, the scientist should be able to reply back to the voice assistants, where can I locate that 50 cc conical tube? And it'll say, oh, it's on the shelf over here on the other side of the lab is where we keep that. A very good use case, I think, for an integration of the voice assistant. And really, it gets back to querying a database. And a lot of the things I think about with integration has to do with querying databases, right? And using that voice tool as sort of that front end, right? And then having the voice tool reaching out to the different databases that we have, whether it be an inventory database, whether it be information about whether an instrument is running or an instrument has gone down, right? Is there an error code on an instrument? Being able to feed those information back to the scientist is something I think we're going to see, you know, evolve pretty quickly now that, you know, the idea of the voice assistant in the lab is really coming to fruition. You know, people are now familiar with voice assistants in their day-to-day life and are using the tools, driving to find out, you know, is this restaurant open, or where can I get, you know, purchase a certain item, you know, right from Amazon.com or wherever. And that's just become natural for people, and it will become natural for them in their laboratory lives as well, I think. But as you said, you know, locating items, ordering items, asking the question of when will that item be delivered, right? I ordered it yesterday, is it going to be delivered today, as I'm thinking about planning my next experiment. So, you know, we see those integrations as really important. And then if you think about what Amazon did with the Alexa, right, with connecting that as a front end to their e-commerce system, we think very much the same here at Avantor VWR, right, to be able to have that same convenience for a scientist user when they need to order more of those 50 cc conical tubes, be able to just ask the voice assistant, hey, voice assistant, please order me another pack of those 50 cc tubes from Avantor. So we see that use case as something that you know is in the near future.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Thanks for that, Bruce. Mathias, so when you're assisting some of your clients, what types of technology are you seeing being integrated, or what do you think has the biggest potential there for integration?
Yeah. So if you ask our clients or look into the projects we have, the people ask more and more for technology. At the beginning, when I started at the Fraunhofer, the people asked more for a solution for a problem, and now we are at the point, or some years ago, that the people ask, okay, I want to have the same experience as I have it maybe at home, maybe I'm familiar with. So today I would say most of our people are familiar with smartphones, tablets, and using these interfaces, which yeah, have a really easy way of interaction with each other, with getting information from a database. So they like really these user-centric applications, and you also have to develop it because the people are familiar with it from the daily life. And with the time, we get more and more intelligent system. Bruce said it before. So if you have more databases, you have more data you can collect, and this will and this supports today your daily work and makes it more and more easy. So to use this data you can collect today, and if the technology, you can use machine learning algorithms, for example, to get more of your data. And yeah, so and now we're at the point that the people know, we had it before, that voice assistants come more and more in all our daily lives. So people ask us, and they really ask us in project, how, okay, why can I control my liquid handle, for example, with my voice? Why can I get the current status of a balance by asking the device? So I think we are now at the point where this technology comes more and more to real life and more to the labs. And if I think in future, now people come to, okay, I have a display somewhere, I have the voice where I can control it. Why do I need this display? Why can't I use, for example, augmented reality? I put on a glass, a security glass, for example, and then I get all the information I ask with, for example, with my voice, and get it displayed directly into the environment. And I don't need any hands. I don't need to put on a smartphone or cell phone. I don't need to put my tablet. It's all into this devices, and it comes all together. Like I said before, I think it's really important to combine the technologies, because then you have the chance to get a bigger effect of all the technologies. So the systems need more, to be more intelligence in the future. And of course, a topic we all have in connected labs is the modularization. So if we want to combine
everyone. So be sure, yes, also to check that out. Magdalena, don't want to leave you out here of this topic. Anything we haven't covered here in terms of integration with technology that you'd like to add?
I think many great cases have been covered. The IoT and sort of connected lab is something that it's already here, and I think the couple of captures that Bruce made about voice being a central point of control. I think this is sort of what I would love for all of you to take away, is that it is about giving access, very quick access to any type of instrument or any type of data in a lab at the whim of the user. So again, it's what Bruce says, always at your fingertips. Or I would even say always at your command. I think that's sort of the vision that we would like to bring to the market.
Great, great. All right, thanks everyone for your insights there. Before we move on to the next topic, another poll question here for the audience. This is the second of 3 polling questions of the day. Again, you can vote on this in real time by clicking on any of the options there. Our question we have for you: which use case will be most impactful for voice assistants? Is that lab documentation, inventory management, calculations, access to science databases, or instrument handling? A lot of options this time. Which use case will be most impactful for voice assistants? And again, you can vote on this in real time by clicking on your screen. And we've got definitely a race for the top spot at the moment. Lots of you are voting. I'll give you another couple seconds here to get your votes in, and then we'll take a look at what the audience thinks is the most impactful. It looks like we've got a clear winner here. I'm going to close polling now and share the results with everyone. 40% of you saying access to science databases makes a lot of sense. 30% saying lab documentation, 20% saying instrument handling, 10% saying calculations. Very interesting. Thanks everyone for voting on that second polling question of the day. We have one more to go just before the live Q&A session. But before that, let's start tackling the challenges of adopting voice assistants. Obviously, a topic here we need to cover. Change management is always something to consider, I think, whenever you're adopting a new technology. What types of trends and challenges should people consider when bringing in a digital voice assistant into their workflow? And how can you keep this transition smooth? Magdalena, I'll leave this to you. Do you have any experience with that?
Sure. I think in today's world, you have words like intelligent or smart, and they are very overused, and that leads to this broad range of expectation amongst the general public of what these systems are capable of. People may expect the product to be both smarter or dumber than it really is, and some would doubt the ability, and some will expect abilities greater than their own capacity. So this is because often we underestimate the number of mistakes or errors that we as humans can make, but we usually overestimate how accurate a machine must be to be better than us in specific tasks. So I think we need to set very much a realistic expectations when we onboard users into our system, explain thoroughly what the system can do and what its limits are. I think that's very important. We find that a challenge often is that organizations spend too little time and effort on developing a robust change management program. The digital transformation in general, not only related to voice assistant, but whenever even you deploying a new ELN, requires radical changes in mindset and has major implications for the organization and individual employees who must develop new skills and new competencies. To succeed, I think companies must make really upfront investment in changing the culture, buying across the business, forging strong links between business and IT functions, and make sure they address user needs. We support our customers with change management, from anything from recruiting early adopters in their organizations, to nurturing champions, to developing demo labs so they can actually experience these tools firsthand, all the way to supporting deployment. And I think bringing any of those new digital tools into the market, this is an area that can be of challenge, yes.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. To follow up with that, Magdalena, one of the biggest questions we got in the last webinar was about data security. How can organizations ensure that their data is secure when using this type of technology?
Great question. All users, for us, all users' content is encrypted, addressed when it's being stored in our databases, as well as in transit when it's being transferred to the users. We run regular penetration tests. Our infrastructure is scanned for a wide variety of vulnerabilities on a regular basis. And we make fixing critical issues one of our top priorities, of course. We also use virtual private clouds to shield our critical systems, and we can scan every in and outgoing data transfer with deep packet inspection firewalls. We are a German company, so we are proud ourselves to be on the forefront of GDPR compliance. We are currently actually completing ISO 001 certification, and we further will continue getting certification in more regulated space, because that ensures that your processes are strong in that category. We ensure complete compliance and traceability in data capture, storage, and transfer. We're very transparent with our customers of what the data journey really looks like throughout our systems.
Right. So obviously lots of points there you brought up in terms of security, and I'm sure people could contact you if they did have some more in-depth questions for you on that.
Sure.
All right, there are, that's two major challenges. Another one, I'm gonna just bring up an example I ran across when I was doing some background. So I found really an ancient reference to the McGraw-Hill Dictionary of the Life Sciences from 1976. It said that it had more than 20,000 scientific terms in that. That was 1976, over 40 years ago. I wouldn't dare now guess how many terms have been added since then. So as many of us know who work in the life sciences, there are new terms being added constantly. Honestly, feel really bad for undergraduate students just getting started with all this new terminology. And so I know that AI is a big part of LabTwin technology. Can this assist in some way with the challenges you might expect from those specialized words that are being added all the time and are used in the life science workplace? And are there ways to improve accuracy and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. At LabTwin, we have, I would call this multi-dimensional approach to improving accuracy for users. We take into account that the language actually differs on the scientific domain level. So that could be between pathology and virology. They will have difference in vocabulary. Second level would be company level, as different companies, they have their own ontologies, which are often directly connected to the IP. Third level would be regional level or lab level, as most global organizations have differences on a local lab level as well. And then finally on the user level, as users have their own preferences and their own shortcuts, their own acronyms that they use. So on the domain level, we train our system based on a large existing body of scientific knowledge via partnerships and acquisitions. On the company level, we develop models that are trained specifically for large organizations, leveraging their ontologies and internal body of knowledge. We also build individual models for enterprises when needed to customize it even further. On the regional level and lab level, this is interesting, the model is trained based on specific workflows, so including environment, noise, equipment that may be in that specific environment. And this actually shows an added opportunity for implementing certain level of global standardization between labs within one enterprise, because we find that actually the workflows, even though should be similar, they can differ. And then on the user level, this needs to be in place in order to be sustainable. On a user level, the model is also trained on the naturally ingested documentation content, as well as custom glossary, which is available to users, and each user can adjust and expand based on their own preferences. All of this is supervised by internal content specialists and trained scientists. We are leveraging supervised learning approach, and we test our accuracy against the general NLP providers on a quarterly basis. And so our prospective customers also do that sometimes, and so far we've been able to meet all the expectations. So of course the system gets smarter the more you use it. So as any machine learning based system, we will get better, and the more we in the market and the more we're used.
Excellent. Okay, thank you for that. I think that rounds it up for the challenges of adopting voice assistants. Briefly, as we're moving towards the Q&A session of the webinar, let's look to what the future might bring, maybe a roundtable of what we see the ideal scenario for pharma R&D in the future. Any final thoughts on this? Let's start off with Bruce. What do you see as the future of R&D with respect to this?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's that voice assistant, right? And I think for each lab, it's going to look a little different. You know, whether it's a production facility or a QC lab, or an R&D chemistry or an R&D biology lab. You know, I think the key in the future is, you know, those points of integration, right? And letting sort of that scientist user experience, you know, drive the details. The tool is, you know, the voice tools are very flexible. So being able to, you know, let those scientists access the information that they need, right? I think, you know, not prescribe it, but solve it for them, and that happens by looking at the workflow. And I think that's what we'll see, right? We'll see different labs leveraging the technology in different ways, but in the end, it gets back to that virtual assistant and really, you know, bringing AI right to the user.
Right. Okay. Interesting. Mathias, what's your perspective on the future of R&D with respect to this?
I see a big chance for voice assistants too, because of the slides and the discussions today, and of course because the big software companies are working on the technology. So I think in the next years we are currently at the start point, and so in the next years the systems we're talking today will understand more and more about the intention of the user. For example, they will understand more and can help you precisely in your daily work. So it will grow and grow and grow. But on the other hand, I will say we also have to focus on the basic digital infrastructure, because all the systems need the data. They need to know how they can assist us, how can help us. And if you think you don't have a system where you can connect your devices, you cannot get the information you want, then speech recognition and all the systems with user interaction couldn't have their full potential to assist you and to help you.
Right. Okay. Great. And I'll leave the last word to you there, Magdalena.
Maybe in short, we are, I feel like, in a very early stages, or in the early stages, not very. We actually, in some areas, it's actually quite mature technology already. But we are in the early stages of the virtual or voice assistant efforts of today. And they can be summarized, I think, as teaching science to machines. In order to support scientists with insight generation later on. We will slowly shift from general assistant, as you think of Amazon or Alexa or Google Home, to virtual experts, which can assist the users with very specialized knowledge. I very often refer to that what we're building is not actually an assistant, but we're building an expert. It's not an expert yet, but with the help of the users and the more it's getting used, it actually over time evolves into these experts that can be proactive and anticipate needs of users and react very quickly to any of the intents or needs.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. I enjoy all your perspectives there. Before we launch into the audience Q&A session, where you can get your chance to ask some of the questions that you have on your end, let's launch a final polling question of the day. Again, that's launching on your screen right now. Is your company or lab ready, you think, to implement a voice assistant? Your option there, yes, immediately, maybe in the near future, or in the mid to long term. Is your company or lab ready to implement voice assistants? Looks like most of you are voting on this one. Thanks everyone for getting your votes in. I'll give you another couple seconds to click on the screen and vote for your answer. I'm going to close polling now and take a look at the results. All right, 38% saying in the mid to long term, 38% saying in the near future, and 25% saying yes immediately. Very interesting split there. Thanks everyone for voting on that final polling question of the day. Let's move on now to the audience Q&A session. Thank you all for that discussion. I'd like now to invite our audience to continue sending in their questions and comments in right now using that questions window, and we've got some here already. Our first question This audience member writes, I work in a lab environment where all users are speaking English, but with Indian, Chinese, and German accents. How can one improve voice recognition in a lab environment where all users are speaking the same language, but with different accents? So I'll leave that to anyone who wants to answer.
I can take this one. We get this question a lot. I think the short answer is this is actually one of the easier problems to solve for companies like ours, just because if you look at the investment that goes into developing this general assistant for Google, by Microsoft, by Amazon, by Facebook, majority of these efforts actually go to this general language processing, and a lot have to do with accents. And if you look at the pickup and the maturity of voice technology over the last couple of years, it's been through tremendous growth and maturity curve. So I actually am pretty confident that this can be overcome, and we actually haven't seen that many challenges in our experience in that space.
Okay, interesting. Thanks for that. Another question here, going back now to a security question, which we were touching on earlier. How do you authenticate the user of the voice assistant? Is there a way to do that through voice biometrics or with systems available today? Again, I'll just leave that open to the floor there. So I'll read that again. Another security question, how do you authenticate the user of the voice assistant? Is there a way to do that through voice biometrics with the systems available today, or through some other method?
I can take this one if nobody. Go ahead.
Oh, it's okay, Magdalena. I will put my answer later.
So we don't do that yet. But there are technologies that exist today. You can actually authenticate by voice biometrics, and that is specifically applicable to space where you actually need to authenticate and actually do signatures. I think why it's not widely implemented yet is because of regulatory perspective. So on a usage level, yes, this is something that's doable today. But I think this is going to become actually even more powerful, where the regulatory bodies will embrace such technology, because at that point you're looking at much greater efficiency gains in some of these workflows.
Yeah,
right.
Maybe it's no my answer. Yes, I'm with Magdalena, and I think in the next years the technology will be better, and you will recognize people because of their voice. People ask us the same thing in our project, and what we do is, again, is we combine technology. So if you cannot solve this problem by voice recognition, you also have one thing. One is you have to activate, for example, your smartphone. Then you can use this PIN code or so on to authenticate the user. Or the other thing is we have little. This is more an practical example. We have little tags. You put it on a specific position in the lab, and then you are authenticated. The system knows that you are allowed, for example, to get the data you want, and afterwards you to pick up your RFID tag, for example, and go away. So of course it's not the perfect way, but you can handle this with another technology today.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. Another question here. I think we've touched on this to a degree, but if we could have a great summary, so definitely to Magdalena here, what makes LabTwin different really from Alexa or Google Home or Siri, any of those consumer-based voice assistants?
Sure. I think first and foremost, we are training an expert. Alexa and Google Home are generalists, if you can say that. I sometimes say that what we build is more similar to Siri, but Siri with a PhD. So one of our users a while ago actually sent us a feedback on his usage, and he said, "I know you might get something like this often, but it feels I've got the coolest version of Siri to run my lab." So what we do is we are very much science specific and more of an expert specialist space. We have life science vocabulary. We do understand life science vocabulary because we train our model in highly specific life science data, as I mentioned. We have content quality control. We improve transcription quality further by employing trained life science experts that are not sitting somewhere in a call center, but they actually are part of our organization and are on their premises. We can, of course, detect unit abbreviations in standardized format. We can format units and acronyms in any desired format. We are workflow specific, and this specific related to intent. So our engine can learn from user data and adopt to the use cases and workflow. We can do this by training on user specific protocols, workflows, and lab environments. So I think, and it also it's platform independent. So it is not a speaker. It is very much scientist-centered system, which means it leverages mobile hardware, phone or tablet, and a single ear headset. The wake word is specific to scientists to prevent false positives, and of course, data security is at the heart of what we do.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that, Magdalena. Also, thank you to Mathias and Bruce for their perspectives there. We have reached the end of the question and answer portion of this webinar. But if you do have any further questions or would like to schedule a demo, you can contact demo@labtwin.com, and I encourage you to do that. If we weren't able to attend any of your last minute questions here today, the team at LabTwin may try to follow up with you after the webinar. And thank you everyone for participating in today's webinar. You'll be receiving a follow-up email from XTalks with access to the recorded archive for this event. And a survey window will be popping up on your screen shortly. Your participation is appreciated as it'll help us improve our further webinars. Now, just a quick thanks so much to our speakers for today, Magdalena Paluch, Mathias Friendo, and Bruce Dembowski.